Welcome to the Dream Journal. From the studios of KSQD in Santa Cruz, the Dream Journal is a weekly show where we explore the power of nighttime dreams through conversations with dream experts and with listeners like you. In the words of Carl Jung, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Today's music is called Evaluary. Join us for a conversation about psychedelics with facilitator Steve Elfrink of Terra Psychedelics. What do dreams and psychedelics have in common? Also, microdosing. I am your host, Catherine Bell of Experiential Dreamwork, and welcome to the Dream Journal. Well, happy birthday, Dream Journal. Today marks the 5th anniversary of this show. As you may have seen if you're following us on social media, the Dream Journal is going through a rebranding. So check us out on Instagram and Facebook and follow hashtag the Dream Journal to find out about upcoming shows and so much more. We are also a weekly podcast. You can subscribe, rate, and review wherever you find that podcast. But most importantly, I'd love this to be an opportunity for you to talk to your friends about dreams. I'm on a mission to increase people's awareness and appreciation for dreaming. You can find archives at all those podcast places, also ksqd.org/the-dream-journal, and now on PRX. I'd like to welcome Steve Elfrink. Hello.
Good morning.
Okay, good morning to you. Let me introduce Steve. Steve Elfrink is the founder of Terra, a psychedelic therapy organization. He is also co-founder of the Rogue Valley Psychedelic Society and the subject matter expert for Webdelics, an online resource for psychedelics. He is a fresh voice to the more harrowing and less discussed challenges that come with psychedelic therapy. You can find Steve at omterra.org, omterra.org. So Steve, glad to have you on the show here.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, and happy birthday, happy anniversary.
Absolutely.
For your show. That's amazing and huge.
It has been quite a ride since 2019 when we began this show. Many changes, and yet our passion for dreams stays the same and only grows.
Yeah, I really appreciate all your efforts and getting dreams out there. I mean, for me, anything that kind of destigmatizes non-ordinary states of consciousness, and I would include dreams in that, to just kind of normalize and bring these different states into more of our awareness. It all help the collective.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit more about how you got started with psychedelics, but let's do that a little bit later. If it's okay with you, let's jump right into some parallels between dreams and the psychedelic state. As you're already alluding to, they are alternative states. And what do you see as similarities and differences?
The biggest similarity is the access to primary consciousness, where dreams live, and then also where psychedelics can take us. And so there's this rich material, what's kind of controlling us 24/7, from this base operating system is this place of primary consciousness. So for me, dreams are, this beautiful built-in system that we have to, try to make meaning of life, to process the day, move things through, bring new awarenesses in. So it's a place of information and healing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, the obvious direct parallel to that is how psychedelics have a similar ability to take us into this place of primary consciousness, of a place of dreams, of this non-linear, non-rational, expanded state. And I was going to say there's some other differences, but I think there's so many parallels. So I was going to go into, psychedelics can take us into deeper places, but I've personally had experiences in dreams that were almost, full on psychedelic.
Right. I have as well. And I've even had dreams about literally being on psychedelics in my dream. Like this is kind of a theme for me, actually, of where I've been drugged and I'm like in a non-ordinary state of consciousness while I'm dreaming, which is kind of a double whammy.
I've had that experience also. They're both just portals into this, the funny thing, it's a portal into this other dimension, but this other dimension always exists. It's always operating at some level. But then with psychedelics, there can be spiritual realms, but those spiritual realms they're always there. And through dreams, psychedelics, we're just given a greater ability to access these places because we have secondary consciousness offline. And, secondary consciousness is where we're trying to make meaning of the world and, trying to figure out how we're going to pay the mortgage this month and what we should cook for dinner tonight.
Okay, and you compare that to primary consciousness. Maybe say a little bit more about that.
Well, this comes out of primarily the work of Robin Carhart-Harris, who's the main researcher, was at Imperial College of London, a psychedelic researcher from Imperial College of London, where he did a bulk of his work, and now he's at University of San Francisco. Oh. But he's the one who really, there's always been Freud's, conscious, subconscious, and then there's also been, Robin Carhart-Harris isn't the one who brought primary consciousness, secondary consciousness to the world, but he's the one who's really brought it more to the forefront because it has, I think, a greater application when discussing psychedelics. So secondary consciousness, the way, he frames it, is that place of cognitive thinking. Like right now, you and I, the listeners in Santa Cruz there, are primarily operating in secondary consciousness, where we're hearing, listening, getting understanding, watching. Also, this sparrow landed, outside the window. Just present moment awareness. And, at work, we're in secondary consciousness. The majority of our waking time, we're in secondary consciousness. So it's like that cognitive get stuff done.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful thing because that's what allows us to get stuff done and invent and create. And then what's operating underneath all that, though, again, 24/7 is primary consciousness. And primary consciousness is also where, dreams live, this non-rational, non-linear, timeless, but also trauma. So the kind of the core source of trauma is also held within primary consciousness and then also within the body. But kind of the bulk of it and the bulk of childhood memories or repressed memories or dissociative amnesia, if we get more down the rabbit hole, all resides within primary consciousness. But primary consciousness is constantly knocking every day, every minute. It's how if we're triggered, someone says something and we don't have a response, but we have a pretty big reaction. We're tapping into primary consciousness, where typically for most folks, a lot of folks, that's also where that wounded child exists. So that child who never got to express themselves, they can live under this lid of dissociation. Dissociation lives in primary consciousness and triggered. And also in that little kid, it's like, opportunity. So primary consciousness can, totally, at any moment emerge out into secondary consciousness. So there's a direct portal between the two.
There's it reminds me of this analogy I've heard about the stars versus the sun. And like during the daytime, the sun is so bright, we can't see the stars, but they're still there. And so, but at night the sun goes down, maybe like when our secondary consciousness goes to sleep, and then we can see the stars. And so the primary consciousness comes out. If that's, primary consciousness is the stars and the secondary is the sun, so that it's still there in the daytime. And I love how you talk about how it bursts through in moments of reaction, or when we're touching into a wounded place, and that primary consciousness can get activated even during the daytime, even while we're trying to focus on the present moment, trying to focus on what needs to be done.
So we can get hijacked by primary consciousness. And the interesting thing there also is the body 24/7, 365, our entire life seeks homeostasis. So homeostasis, just a normal operating system. Like our body, one example of homeostasis would be our body at 98.6 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So body will do anything to keep us at 98.6, just on average, 98.6.
True. Mm-hmm.
So, if we start to exert ourselves, we sweat, respiration increases, but everything is geared by body to keep us at 98.6.
Mm-hmm.
So the same thing holds true with any level of trauma that we're holding or anything that's unresolved. Body's trying to work it through. In the body, when I say body, I should include primary consciousness / body, the autonomic nervous system. It's trying to process what needs to be processed. So body knows how to process trauma, but we suppress. Secondary consciousness is also the great kind of suppressor.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to go there. We don't want to feel that. We're going to take a deep breath. We're going to grab the Ben and Jerry's.
Yes.
And everything to not go there, but body is constantly, and again, when I say body, I'm really got to keep adding it into primary consciousness / body, constantly trying to process. And the same thing happens in dreams. It's really, for me, dreams are one of, our primary consciousness, one of its efforts to kind of clean house, trying to seek homeostasis, trying to process things, trying to process, the day and trying to release what needs to be released.
Mm-hmm. I love there's a phrase I've heard about dreaming that it's like a part of our emotional immune system, like trying to get us into balance and to clean up things. Because we might say, like, why would I need to worry about that primary consciousness if I can function just fine during the day? Then what is, well, I guess maybe that's the if, that is the big if, is if I am functioning just fine during the day. Like, why is it valuable to pay attention to that primary consciousness? And then I want to get into how psychedelics and dreaming, for that matter, help us actually do that.
Why do we want to pay attention? I think every one of us has some level of unresolved emotional, I don't want to call it baggage, but just unresolved, unintegrated emotions primarily from childhood. I read this recently, and I think it's spot on, that as adults, we're really working on, processing that first 7 years of our life. Mm-hmm. That's our job as an adult, is trying to process all that, what happened to us in that 0 to 7, the most formative phase of our life. So anyone and everyone has some level of unintegrated emotions. There's something in there that's controlling their life every day. I wouldn't say controlling is a little too strong, but it's arising. Mm-hmm. It's presenting itself. Anytime you're triggered, that's some level of unintegrated emotion that exists in primary consciousness.
Right. Jung talks about the complexes, the things that take over our consciousness when we're in this triggered state. You're used to the word triggered, and
yes.
Like when there's something, and that would say that, going with our current analogies, that was something that's rising up from primary consciousness from an unhealed wound.
That, yes. And we all have, different unhealed wounds. And, and trauma needs to be kind of redefined, because trauma for most folks means, some bad event happened, bad car accident, some form of physical abuse or something else. But there's also, some people will call it soft trauma or small t trauma, capital T trauma. But any level of neglect as a child from that 0 to 7, a narcissistic mother, a bully brother,
just a really busy, right?
I'm sorry?
I mean, overworked mother, like it could even just be kind of incidental trauma, and yet it feels like neglect to the child.
Yeah, because as a child, we're 100% wired biologically. We come into this world expecting love, nurturance, compassion, appreciation, being held, our needs being met. And if any of that's not happening at any degree, again, it can even be, unintentional from the mother or the father, but sometimes things, and also it depends on the sensitivity of that child. So there's so many factors that go into that 0 to 7. But if we're not getting those needs met and we're not being seen or received or felt or heard or nurtured, a lot of times a young child will start to internalize that as I'm bad, I did something wrong. Because parents, our primary caregivers are gods. They're, responsible for our, survival. Mm-hmm. And they can do no wrong. So we can internalize so much as we did something wrong if this biological, needs aren't being met. So there can be what I'm trying to say here really is that there's so many different levels of, we can call it trauma or unintegrated feelings and emotions and sensations even that get stuck and held in primary consciousness. So for me, the value of primary consciousness is it's this built-in, sub-basement operating system that is designed along with the body's, innate wisdom to heal us. Like if we get out of the way, and that's what, we're, segueing to psychedelics. If we get out of the way, the body, primary consciousness can do its magic, which is process unintegrated emotions, move stuff through. And then, so the beauty within primary consciousness with its timelessness, a lot of anyone with any levels of trauma usually has attachment issues. And there's we could go deep into attachment issues, but a lot of kids never bonded or attached to a parent because there wasn't someone fully there to bond to. But even in the primary consciousness, because all that is timeless, you can form, attachments into, kind of going down a rabbit hole here a little bit.
I'm with you.
But there's a way for that, bonding and attachment to happen in primary consciousness that ripples back to that 2-year-old.
Yes. And so by healing ourselves in the moment, we actually are healing our past selves. It's something, if I could take it another step farther, that's the way I look at dream work and psychedelic work as well, I think. Is that something that resonates for you?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I think, dreams are, I'm trying to think of the word. There's so much potential. Like there should be more, and I appreciate what you're doing, Catherine, getting the word out about dreams, but there should be, there's a great awareness on psychedelics, and I would love to see the equivalent around dreams because there's so much potential there for folks.
Absolutely. You're preaching to the choir. So, I have a couple different things popping up for me. I guess let's go to how do psychedelics help that? Like I love that you brought in Robin Carhart-Harris's work because I've read a little bit of his stuff and seen some videos of him, and he talks about a process called rebus, relax, believe under psychedelics, and I wonder if that's something that he still is a proponent of, something that you agree with, and I think it applies to dreaming as well. Relax beliefs under dreaming. So there's a way that we relax our beliefs, and so we get to shift them while we're in these altered states. And is there a better way? Is there a way that you prefer to look at this, or is this something you're familiar with?
No, yeah, familiar and totally agree. And his other thing that he used to talk a lot about, or really brought to the forefront, was just the default mode network.
Yeah.
How our brains, we get in these ruts of ABC, 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 where it can be, my life sucks, we're just stuck in that loop. And it's like literally, some people call it like a deep groove in an album, and it's just on repeat or skipping. And the beautiful thing about psychedelics is they, kind of bust that open a little bit. So instead of ABC, what it's going to do is, and this is also part of neuroplasticity, where we're getting, these new links, new possibilities, new potentials once that default mode network is kind of, I don't want to say blown open, but expanded. So instead of going ABC, ABC, all of a sudden you realize it's actually A, R squared, zebra, turbocharged, on and on. I mean, just it opens up people to new possibilities. It takes people out of their cognitive Kansas and, puts them into this new frame of mind. But what it's doing is going within primary consciousness and kind of breaking up the cobwebs in there and allowing access to different possibilities, really, new connections, new awareness, new understanding, insight. And I think, dreams have that same potential.
Absolutely, yeah. So why can't I just take some ecstasy and go to a party? Like, would that be like a way to transform my consciousness? Or what? I'm joking, of course, because that might be a way to have a nice party. But I want to hear a little bit more about your process. Like, I understand that what you do is you facilitate psychedelic therapy, and I wonder if you want to say a little bit more about what psychedelic therapy is and how it's beneficial.
Yeah. So for me, there's kind of two levels of psychedelic therapy. And the classic level of psychedelic therapy is kind of what we're talking about as far as more of this insight model, expansive model, reframing, new understandings, breaking out of the cage of our minds into the universe, and speaking of that, unity consciousness, we're all one. So it's more model one of psychedelic therapy is kind of the classic psychedelic therapy of, these larger doses of psychedelics and then, kind of going into these spiritual realms and, expanded consciousness states. And that's, what's the big focus is right now, with all the studies, Johns Hopkins, UCLA, University of Wisconsin, on and on and on. Everyone's looking at these expanded states, mystical experience to bring insight into people. And then with the thought that, okay, with insight, we can heal depression. And which I'm one of the naysayers. I believe in that model and I believe it's powerful and it's, I wouldn't be here today without that model. So it can create these incredible shifts, but it's, accessing one major aspect of primary consciousness. And for me, and that also with psychedelics at that level takes us, increases the antenna into these different, spiritual realms or, further outside of mind and into, the universe, literally. And then the second and more important, and this is, the main focus of my work. So I do work with psilocybin. I'm a licensed facilitator in the state of Oregon, so it's a legal approach with psilocybin. But it's meant to be a non-directive therapeutic and really just meant to let people have a psychedelic or psilocybin experience, which there is value in that. But my main focus is more on a somatic process. For me, there's, the mind, spirit, and I believe in more of this. This is where I frame my work as holistic psychedelic therapy. So for me, the foundation for anyone is body. So if we have a pyramid, body's at the bottom, and then mind, fabric of reality, and then at the top of the pyramid would be that spiritual place, transcendence, transegoic place. But at the bottom, we need the foundation of body and not taking that, top pointy thing of spiritual and trying to put that as our base, which can happen in the psychedelic community where it's all about, it can be psychedelic bypassing, there's spiritual bypassing, there can be psychedelic bypassing, where we're constantly chasing these experiences, looking for transcendence and these mystical experiences. I know in my own experience, I was transcending constantly, but really just trying to get away from my trauma. And then my basic tenet is insight does not heal trauma. So
that's worth repeating there. Insight does not heal trauma. Okay, interesting.
So, and I know, and also I want to say, I know people have gotten incredible benefits from psychedelics and trauma, and then also to recognize there's such a spectrum of trauma. It's, I think also a lot of people, including a lot of therapists, no offense to therapists, but the complexity of trauma is so complex. As far as when it started, number of folks involved, family of origin, the person's personality, the number of, events, just on and on. Was there someone good in their life? On and on and on and on. And so for me, and this is, I've always been my own guinea pig, my own lab rat of trying to figure out why, why was I, suicidal at an early age? Why was I in a psych ward for suicide attempts? Why was this constant anxiety, depression, intrusive thoughts, suicidal ideation, it kept coming back. I'd get all this insight in the world, and then I would be back after 6 months, or 3 weeks. But this baseline of anxiety, depression kept coming back, even with all the insight. So segue to, for me, the most important aspect of psychedelic therapy is the foundational element of body. And so when I say body, that's also, we're still talking about primary consciousness, but it's where all this held charge, held reactivity lives is within body, within primary consciousness subset body. and then specifically in the autonomic nervous system. So, and this is also what, if someone's experiencing depression, anxiety, 90% of that, there can be some here and now, but if it's constant and throughout their life, there's something in that 0 to 7 that is unresolved and just slowly, always just kind of, I call it off-gassing, releasing. This anxious child who never got to fully feel everything is just, any opportunity to just let a little of this anxiety out. So there's this, my focus is using psychedelics. My greatest focus is using psychedelics to access primary consciousness, and then within primary consciousness, the subset of body/autonomic nervous system.
So does this still involve these massive doses, or is this more realm of
this is more, it's more what we call psycholytic dose.
Oh, okay.
So what's interesting, in the 60s, when most, late 50s, 60s, when most of the research in psychedelics was going on, and in the US, it was really a focus on more large dose, large doses of LSD, large doses of psilocybin, non-directive, headphones, eye shades.
Right.
And that's the classic model. In Europe at the same time, what they were doing, Stanislav Grof in the Czech Republic back then was, he was working with high dose and also psycholytic. So psycholytic it's not a microdose, but it's just a smaller dose. So like with LSD, it might be like 50 micrograms. With psilocybin, it could be, anywhere about 500 milligrams. So these kind of lower dose, what allows the person to still be online. And then allowing, so what we're trying to do there is just get secondary consciousness offline. So executive functioning, secondary consciousness offline, and then allowing us, and this is much more directive approach for the facilitator or therapist to then start kind of working through some of that stuff in primary consciousness.
So that working through you mean by talking about? So there's more, it's like an interactive, like a therapy session, but with a dose?
Yeah, it can be interactive. So it came out of, in Europe, psychodynamic therapy was very big. And it's a very directive, it's talk therapy, but it's a much more directive approach to talk therapy, a much deeper dive. And the way I work with it is taking it another step. And it's a directive approach, but it's really focused specifically on trauma. So in this, excuse me, the model I work with comes out of the lineage of Peter Levine, who a lot of people are familiar with. He started somatic experiencing. But he's probably the first person. Bessel, Kolk, and Peter Levine were the first guys to bring in this awareness around body and how the body holds trauma. So body for trauma. So there's Peter Levine, and then a gentleman named Eric Walterstorff, who took Peter Levine's work to another level of focusing in on body for trauma, and a more focused approach to work with dissociation, which, there's fight, flight, or freezes dissociation. And then a gentleman named Saj Razvi took Eric's work to another level and started he added MDMA into it as part of, he was a therapist out of Denver, Colorado. And he added MDMA because he was part of the phase 1 FDA study for MDMA. And back then it was pretty loose. You could use any model. So he was taking Eric's model and then applying, using MDMA in that process and finding great results. And then it segued through private practice that he was involved with into adding in cannabis and ketamine because they were legal and accessible. And long story short, the beautiful thing here is, for me, the bulk of my work is I'm working with low-dose ketamine and low-dose cannabis. So in a psycholytic approach to just get mind off. And then a process, and this could be a whole show.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that.
Running short on time. But what it allows is, and through this process called selective inhibition, you inhibit all standard coping mechanisms under this low dose ketamine or cannabis. Typically, I use a combo of the two. and go through a little body meditation, focusing body, body, body. And if you can't take that deep breath, you can't scratch your nose, you can't lick your lips, you can't nod your head, can't fidget your fingers, the system pressurizes. And all of a sudden there's going to be activation. And so this activation is now what we're doing is activating the autonomic nervous system that's been somewhat suppressed by secondary consciousness, allowing everything that's been held, all these held reactivity, held charge, to come out. And it comes out primarily through sensations. And it's very intense and very powerful, but for me, it's the only thing I could find in my everlasting quest for why, and trying to find resolution, was focusing on body and the early childhood trauma, and some that I wasn't even aware of, which is common for a lot of folks.
Well, let's hold that, and I want to get into that in the second half when we're going to get more personal, and I'll hear some more of your particular stories, which have been fascinating. I've been reading about online, so it's not like a secret because it's all on your webpage. So Steve Elfrink is our guest today. The webpage is Terra, OMTerra.org. I think I might have said .com at the top. It's Terra.
I think you did. You said .org.
Oh, good. Okay. Terra.org. So you're listening to the Dream Journal, and we'll be back after this short break. We are broadcast live from the KSQD studios in Santa Cruz and co-broadcast live in San Jose by KCXU. All right, welcome back to the Dream Journal. My name is Catherine Bell, and I'd like to let you know that now is the time to look into joining this year's IASD conference, which is happening at a 13th Century Abbey in the Netherlands, June 8th through 12th. Next year, it's looking like it'll be a virtual online conference, which is wonderful in certain ways, but if you like that in-person experience, then you might want to get your trip in this year. So you can go to asdreams.org for more information. Next week, we'll be talking about emotional intelligence and how to become better stewards instead of exploiters of the earth. Our guests are Norman Brown and Marcia Hudson. So we welcome back Steve Elfrink of Terra Holistic Psychedelic Therapy at omterra.org. So, Steve, we have so much to talk about.
Yes, it's a big rabbit hole.
It really is. No, it's very fascinating. And, we were talking about those 0 to 7-year-old traumas that tend to kind of form the backdrop of our existence, that primary consciousness that we were talking about. And one of the highlights is that 0. Like, I've really been mulling over the fact that every human was born. Like, there's some way that we started out in a nice, comfy womb, and then we were thrust out, whether through conventional birth or through cesarean, in very abruptly into a very different world. And so even though we might have had the most loving childhood you could imagine, there's still that moment of being ripped from the womb that we begin with. And maybe there's something about why water is such a common metaphor for a place that's peaceful and beautiful, because we're remembering back to the womb. And I wondered if you could tell a little bit about your history with psychedelics and how you got started with that and what you found out about your trauma. You hinted about being suicidal at age 4, being institutionalized in the late teens because of suicide, being attempts, and maybe you could get a little more personal and tell us what your journey has been.
Sure. Thank you for that opportunity. And it is a beautiful thing that we know state 0. And state 0 would be, like where every system, everything in our whole body is just chill. That would be state 0. Yeah, but we came in, at one point we all experienced state 0. And, that is, that womb state.
In the womb, yeah.
Yes. And then life happens.
Right. including starting out with being born. I mean, and then everything from that moment afterwards, there's hunger, there's discomfort, there's cold, which all these things we never experienced in the womb.
I'll dive into me in a bit. And just I want to add to that. And with that, those levels of discomfort, but if there's someone there that, because as a child, as an infant, we can't soothe. But if there's someone there that's, constantly nurturing us, constantly, returning us to state zero. Mm-hmm. So that's where, like breastfeeding is so important, the mother being with the child as much as possible in those, especially early months. And I know it's tough for any mom to, be there 24/7. So I don't want to ever put any guilt around that. But if a child has these opportunities to, keep returning to state zero, it really starts to set a really strong foundation for that little nervous system. Mm-hmm. And if it's not there right off the bat, that's when, stuff starts, that state zero starts to get kind of out of whack. Mm-hmm. So my story, again, this could be a novel, literally.
Yes, I'm sure.
So excuse the big throat clear. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was really this question at an early age. And I think also I'm one of those people that I have always had just this insatiable quest for knowledge and meaning and understanding. And it's something that, even as a young, 6-year-old, there was always there, like why, and questioning religion, questioning everything I was told, and just in this constant pursuit for the truth or what I knew was out there. So I think just internally, personality-wise, whatever, I've always been on this quest. So a big quest for me was, as I got a little bit older, of this why. Why was I, suicidal age? It was somewhere between 4 and 5 where I would, and this is kind of going forward, a trigger warning. And I'm going to, temper it back. But some of this, I'm pretty open about, and I have no shame or anything around my past. But I also want to honor other folks where they're at. But how I earliest memories of like something doesn't make sense here was this, suicidal, kid who at 4 or 5, I would, brought up Christian, conservative, Southeast Minnesota. And my prayer would be the classic, now I lay me down to sleep. And then whatever the rest of that was. And then would be, please God, kill me in my sleep. Please, God.
Oh, that's a scary thing to be having our kids mumble over every night before bed.
So that's how I'd go to sleep. And then I'd continue that kind of end mantra as I was trying to fall asleep. And then I'd wake up alive and then angry at God. And also feeling like, well, I'm so bad, so unworthy. God won't even take, a second out of his busy day to, kill me. So really early stuff there. And then that continued as this kind of depressed, introverted kid. Also looking back in hindsight, levels of dissociation would pop in where I would be walking to school, but then wouldn't remember, all of a sudden I'd be on walking on the sidewalk and I wouldn't remember how I got to that point on the sidewalk. And that would happen a lot. So it's just these big dissociative gaps were kicking in. And then I'll try to really condense this, but I kind of like with the psychedelics, what I ended up going through was kind of first this recreational phase. So I started, for me, I found alcohol at age 13 and other drugs, but it was this place of relief. I finally found relief from this internal depression, anxiety that's not really talked about, or, it's not something parents aren't really aware of. I was just so internal. But I found solace, peace, an escape through, drugs, alcohol. And then at 16, LSD came into the picture. So there's a really intense recreational phase. And it was it did keep me alive to some degree because it was just this escape valve that I found. And with LSD, I found I could drink more, I could party more. But it was also started to give me some glimmers of something else. So I was also doing these, like high dose LSD sessions, very, very high, crazy high. But in those really high sessions, little glimmers, but I was still, using mass amounts of alcohol, other drugs with them. But so that recreational phase was more of an escape.
Mm-hmm.
And then segued into more of a psychonaut phase because I did end up in psych ward and ended up in a drug treatment center, ended up in a halfway house. This is in early 20s. And then kind of shifted out of that into this really hardcore psychonaut phase where, massive doses of LSD combined with ketamine, combined with blinking LED eye shades and binaural beats with deep space sounds. So it was this, but it was also, I was trying to I had this, I want to break through. Mm-hmm. I want to find the answer. But again, I'm trying to transcend the pain. But even that psychonaut phase and doing large doses of everything, but no big breakthroughs, but just this attempt to transcend. And then what really changed my life was I made it through college, kind of got my life together, got through college, got, good job, corporate job. I was the corporate guy. And, I was doing everything the culture told me to do. And then it was still super, this raging depression came back again and raging suicidality. And I was at a point where I was going to do something I knew would be kind of like the final solution. Mm-hmm. And on the other side, I was going to give myself a choice, try option A, which was going to be one final huge dose. And it was 1,200 micrograms. Mm-hmm. So it's standard to be about 100 micrograms, beefy dose, 300 micrograms. But I chose to do 1,200 micrograms and then had, this other option waiting for me if that didn't work or if the experience just went into awful hell realms, I could end it quickly. So I was about 29. And then from that moment or that day, or actually that night, I was by myself, which I never recommend, but I was just so desperate, by myself in my apartment, Scottsdale, Arizona. And that night, my life changed. I wouldn't be here, honestly, unequivocally say I wouldn't be here if that, what happened that night happened. What happened that night was the most, the classic mystical unity experience, white light, all is one, I'm one with everything. I became shimmering white light. I was looking at the bathroom mirror at one point, and this is pretty early on, and my face was the most beautiful face that ever existed, but then my face then morphed into, and I can still see it to this day, this trail of every face that ever existed. Mm. And every face that ever existed was the most beautiful face because we all have this place in us, this white light unity consciousness. We are all one. And it was, that's a term that's stated, we're all one, but, to experience it fully and to embody that is a whole other experience. And then so it went the majority, about 6 hours of that session, I was just laying on the floor with this reciprocal circulation of love. There was this love, gratitude, bliss, compassion, grace. I don't know if I said gratitude, but just this swirl of white light. And, my apartment's gone, but I was just part of the cosmos, and this light was streaming in me, but I was also reciprocal. So it was coming through me and then out of me, and I was feeding it back into the universe and receiving from the universe this universal love. Mm. And in that place, there's, also tears of gratitude, tears of grief. I would call myself a nihilist prior to this, and I'm not a religious guy, but, at some levels, I found God. I found, meaning. I never had meaning, and that I was part of something. I never felt part of anything. So it was a huge transformation, and I came out of it the next day, and, the suicidality was gone, the depression was gone, everything was gone, and everything came in as far as, receiving the universe, receiving, who I was in the universe. So kind of a feeling of rebirth, reborn. And then, so huge life-changing experience. But then I'm going to kind of make this next part a little faster, just in expediency here. So then what I found, though, so I had this huge breakthrough, and it changed my life. I, started discovered, oh, there's organic food.
Right.
And I, found, a guy, this Alan Shockley, who I, huge part of my life in Tucson, Arizona, who was, quarter Cherokee, but introduced me into like shamanic, rituals and, earth-based rituals, sweat lodges, and just this whole new paradigm that I never knew existed, but that experience just opened me up into new possibilities. Primal scream therapy, ecstatic dance. I was, this conservative dude. I've always been, definitely on the liberal side, but little southeast, very conservative Rochester, Minnesota, and then just, blown open in a good way. But what I found is, so I'm doing all this work, all this beautiful work, but eventually this place of suicidal ideation, I never went fully back into suicidality, to where, I never had another suicide attempt. But this kind of baseline of what I was very familiar with kept coming back. And so, I kind of went into the spiritual therapeutic phase where I was, now doing medicine more, again, from trying to heal myself through insight. So I was doing, did ibogaine, did peyote, DMT. I want to think a little tangent. Ibogaine and dreams. I mean, there's a whole show you could do on ibogaine and dreams. It's probably the psychedelic that's most aligned with Dreamwork.
Oh, interesting.
But that's a tangent. But what I found again and again and again, I kept getting these breakthroughs, and then stuff would come back. And then also I'd started finding the pitfalls and perils and the scary stuff about psychedelics. I went through a 3-day ayahuasca ceremony and then ended up kind of losing a year of my life where I would go in and out of now understanding it. But at the time, I had no clue. I didn't understand. I also had birth trauma, and I didn't know about the birth trauma. But now in hindsight, I knew I was just looping in birth trauma for literally a year. And so in very destabilized state, depersonalization, derealization, could be taken out anywhere from 3 minutes to 8 hours, where it felt like my body was being ripped into, which was forceps delivery. But I was just stuck in this state. So, and also I, ended up in an FDA study for psilocybin, doing 3 doses over 3 months, escalating doses. There was pharmacokinetics, so looking at blood serum levels, and then also looking at adverse reactions from high dose psilocybin. So being a 6'1" Dutch guy, big frame, ended up getting the largest dose in published FDA history. So, and that was the classic Hopkins model, headphones, eye shades, but 3 doses of just hell realms, awful, on some levels, bad trips. But again, I was just looping in trauma with no resolution, just looping and looping and looping in trauma in these hell realms. And then the 3rd dose, I did have a bit of a breakthrough, a very profound experience. And I did have some resolution, I had temporary resolution from a lot of what I was going through.
Hey, Steve, I want to jump in here. I have a quick question from Max in the studio here.
Sure. What questions?
Okay. Hi, Steve.
Hi.
My question is, the talk you're giving is very compelling, and it's leading me and probably everybody who's listening to think that they maybe should try this.
Except for the hell realms. I don't know about that.
Well, actually, whatever, but like the whole psycholytic idea is good. Is there a governing body or a licensing body or some loose organization or association of practitioners that somebody who was, say, in like Georgia or Missouri or Illinois could contact, or out on the West Coast here could contact some national thing?
The sad answer is no, as far as any really effective organization that has a list of all practitioners. And then it's different states. Oregon currently is the only state where there's legal access to psilocybin. There's some, like Oakland has decriminalized, pretty much all psychedelics. So there's, people facilitating sessions in Oakland. It's decriminalized in Denver. soon to be legalized in Colorado. But it's one of the, lacking resources out there as far as finding facilitators, and then finding, the other challenge is finding a good facilitator.
Right.
But there's, one company is Third Wave that has a directory, but it's not complete. I mean, it's, a fraction of who's out there. Psychable, I always mess up their name. Psychable is another one. It's like, I'm not even going to try, but it's like psych and then able, Psychable. And those are the two biggest ones I'm aware of.
Well, thank you, Max. That's helpful. I appreciate that question, and we really do need to wrap up. So I wonder if Steve, if you have some suggestions for our listeners, and this is Steve Elfrink from Terra.org, and if you have any encouragements and cautions for listeners as we wrap up the show.
Yeah, I think the big thing would be psychedelics are profound, amazing, incredible, life-changing substances, and huge benefit for a lot of folks and for the culture at large. And there's also a bit of a myth out there that one dose of psilocybin and depression is cured. For me, one dose of psilocybin can put you on the path.
Okay.
And it's rare that, and I know there's studies saying, there's these benefits, and there are benefits, but it's more of, for me, just for anyone to understand it's a path. Because that one session may give you a breakthrough, maybe give you insight, but you have to keep working it. So the whole integration process, and there's probably going to be another session in there. And then if there's anyone with trauma, really proceed with caution. If you've got complex PTSD, proceed with caution.
Okay.
And then I would just, put more awareness to, any somatic approach with psychedelic therapy, and also looking at psycholytic therapy for folks with trauma.
Thank you so much, Steve. Steve Elfrink, this is a pleasure, and we have plenty more we could talk about. So who knows?
Yes.
I'm even going to slip in there Webdelics, which is a wonderful podcast hosted by Scott Mason, who has a lot to say about psychedelics, and one of those trusted resources that Steve Elfrink is also one of the. What is your position at Webdelics?
My official title right now is subject matter expert.
Subject matter expert. Okay.
Oh, and then one quick plug on that also is I'm going to be doing a weekly editorial that's going to start, I think, next week.
On the Webdelics podcast?
On Webdelics,
Oh, fantastic.
Around all these wonderful topics.
I look forward to that. So thank you, still from Elfrink. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine, and all the work you're doing to get dreams out there. They're important.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, well, thank you all for listening. The Dream Journal is produced at the studios of KSQD in Santa Cruz, and we are live every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific at ksqd.org. The podcast is released on the Monday after the show. I am Catherine Bell. You can find out about my dream coaching practice at experientialdreamwork.com. You can email me at catherine@ksqd.org. That's KATHERINE at ksqd.org. Follow Experiential Dreamwork and hashtag The Dream Journal on Facebook and Instagram to find out about upcoming shows. And check out our new branding coming soon and celebrate our 5th year anniversary. I'd like to thank Rick Kleffel, music engineer, Tony Rosamano, Max Deaton. And tomorrow morning when you wake up, take a minute to write down your dream and bring it to the next Dream Journal.
Was what I learned in the old school is there's no fool like an old fool. Make the most of the moments you've got. Time to spend can never be bought. Make the most of the moments you've got. Time to spend can never be bought. On the high street in a low